Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Well, this is, are we on episode 42, AJ?
42,
is that right?
Yes, indeed.
Wow, this is a big one for us, largely because, AJ, we've never put this much time, energy, effort, and care into putting an episode together. For those of you that have, I'm sure you've just marked your calendar every week. You're waiting for an episode to come out, and you may have noticed that one didn't come out last week. And the reason is we've been working on this for, 10 days now, AJ? Something like that?
Yeah.
So set this up for us. What are we talking about? Why has it taken us 10 days to get this thing together?
The topic is, the racial tension in the United States right now. So that's what we wanted to talk about. And the overarching theme and topic that a week and a half ago, we said, what does TMG have to do with any of this? Where might we be able to be helpful in the dialogue? That is, you, pastors, leaders of churches, what could we bring to you that may help you lead well through this time? We very quickly also decided the last thing we need to do is just have he and I get on here and start talking about it, as supposed experts that would then be able to impart some wisdom to you. We did not feel equipped to do that. So we immediately then thought, well, then we need to just speak with others who have more experience in this than us, have different point of view than us. We did conduct 3 one-on-one interviews. Scott has 2 that we're going to show you today, and I had 1. And they're not short, and we will likely put out the full interviews at a later time so that you can just see each of them individually.
So the way this is going to work is AJ and I are just going to set up each interview very briefly, and then so you know who you're listening to in that conversation. And we have two white pastors, pastors that I know personally and respect, that are really on the forefront of leading change in a healthy way. These are both, godly evangelical pastors that you would, likely know and respect in your own circles if you happen to come across them. But voices that I really respect and I feel like I can learn from. And then we're honored to have Dr. Ivan Pitts. He is a leader of color, and he's the senior pastor at Second Baptist Church in Santa Ana, California, and is a pastor that we have had a personal relationship with as an organization for a long time, as we've worked with him. And AJ will introduce him here in a little bit. But what did we want to accomplish in this episode? And as AJ said, we wanted to contribute in a healthy way, to think of a way that we could help you as a pastor and a church leader to lead well in this situation and in this moment in history, because this is something that your kids will read about in history books and your grandkids will read about in history books. This is a pivotal moment, and we have an opportunity to rise to the occasion and lead in a particular way. And I know that for me, and as a white conservative man, I have knee-jerk reactions to things. And one of the things that I've been trying to do and counter my instincts is to slow down a little bit, pump the brakes, and listen and learn what I can. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell you right now, I have not abandoned all of my core beliefs, but I have learned a lot. And I hope that on this podcast and as human beings, and particularly as leaders, that we can always be learners, and we can always be constantly growing and adapting and changing in ways that align not with culture, but with Christ, and not with what this organization or what your social media says, but be growing in Christ likeness and in alignment with the gospel. And I feel like the interviews that you're going to hear today help us move in that direction.
Yeah, it's been a transformative week for me as well. Prior to a week ago Monday, today is June the 9th. So like the last couple of days of May, the last weekend in May, I was feeling super beat down about this. And with 48 hours later, after really hearing from some people that I think just explain things really well, I could begin to see, wow, we need to listen to our African American brothers and sisters, because there's a large group, there's a large contingency here that are all saying the same thing. And for the most part, they're also saying, will you please listen? Will you hear what we're saying? And when I did start listening, now I can see, yeah, this is a thing, and we need to do what we can do to work on this. And Scott and I both believe that, I mean, the root of any healthy change and improvement in humanity comes through the church. And so we're blessed to be able to work in this space. And I'm super hopeful now, because I think, we at the Malfers Group can affect change through the churches that we interact with, through you that listen to the podcast. And I think things can be done to really make improvements from this point forward in history. So
that's right. So the first interview that I'm going to set up is Pastor Robbie Hilton. Robbie is the pastor at Calvary Church in Johnson City, Tennessee, which happens to be the church that I attend. One of the things that's sort of a happy accident, I didn't start attending Calvary Church because the church is a multi-ethnic church. I don't even know that I knew that prior to starting attending. It was one of those things that I kind of rolled up and sort of discovered about the church, and something quite honestly I didn't know I needed in my life, something I really appreciate about the culture of our church. We live in an area here in East Tennessee that is statistically 96% white. That is the demographic breakdown of where I live. So to have a church that the diversity in the church outpaces the diversity in our community is really it's difficult to achieve. And so I really respect Pastor Robbie and his perspective and his leadership, and felt like there was a lot that I could learn from him, not just because he's my pastor at the church that I attend, but because he's been really leading in this area for decades at this point. And so I hope that you will sit back and listen for the next about 12 and a half minutes to a conversation that I had with Pastor Robbie.
Well, the question today, the central question of the day really is, how would you encourage, because we do have a diverse church, or at least diverse, certainly for our area. How would you encourage other pastors to lead through this really heartbreaking but historic moment in history?
Yeah, I think for me, I started first by having conversations with my Black friends. Honestly, I just behind the scenes, before I got in the pulpit and started talking from my own personal experiences, which are limited, from my own education, which is limited, and just from my own, life and, relationships in general. Are limited. I've lived in East Tennessee most of my life, and so I don't have a broad spectrum of experiences, and so I had to really just sit and ask people from different places and spaces, places that I've visited, but places I've never lived. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So hear one thing and think something about a city, or think something about a person or their experience, and not really know it. So I started just by trying to ask questions like, tell me how you feel. Like, what does this do to you? I think one of the most influential conversations I had was someone telling me about the trauma of just being Black in America, and the feelings and emotions that are associated with something like we saw in that horrific video of the officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck. And also just a few weeks before that with Ahmaud Arbery and being chased down in the truck, and those images of him being shot and falling in the street, and it's two white men. And so he was telling me about the trauma, and he said there's something in the psyche of Black men and women of America that we've got to deal with. So I'm trying to understand, and I'm trying to come to grips with, like, what's the feeling behind all of this? What's the emotion behind all of this, and how does this affect you personally? And so the stories of, like, friends who have their 12-year-old son comes to them and says, "Dad, are they going to kill me too because I'm Black?" grown men who have doctorates and have been educated in the greatest universities of our country weeping for days over what they've seen.
Yeah.
I don't think we have really ever dealt with the trauma, and I'm sorry isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so I encourage pastors to go deeper than just, I feel bad for what's happening, and have that conversation one weekend and do something during Black History Month. I really encourage them to dig deep into the relationships that they have with Black men and women, and to take those beyond the surface of just like, we hang out, we talk, but ask questions, get to the trauma associated with it, get to the feeling associated with it, get to like the depths of emotion that many have over this type of thing. And I think you'll gain a perspective, because what you need as a white leader is a perspective that you'll never have personally. We have to be willing to pay a price for something and to go the distance in something that maybe we had nothing to do with personally. So for instance, when someone says, well, you know, the Black person I know, they were never a slave, or I never owned a slave, or I never been racist. That mindset is going to limit us, because it's not a Christ-like mindset. A Christ-like mindset says, I'm going to pay the price, and I'm going to take responsibility for something I didn't even personally do. I didn't cause this harm. I didn't cause this damage. It's the same thing when Jesus is talking and he's telling the story of the Good Samaritan. And the Samaritan takes the man, and he says to the person who's put him in his care, and he says, here's some money for his care. And then when I come back, if he owes anything else, if you've had to do extra, I'll take care of that as well. Even though I'm not the one who almost ended his life in the streets. It's not my fault that he was laying there on the verge of death, but I'm going to take responsibility for his care now. I think that's what the white community has to do. It's like, man, we got to put all of this like defensive stuff down.
Yeah.
Like trying to, I'm not a racist. And just say, okay, listen, I might not have had nothing personally to do with slavery, but I'm going to take responsibility for healing the people that are still broken because of not only the slavery, but the systematic abuse of minorities that continues in our culture today. I'm going to take the personal responsibility to make sure that those people are healed. And if it costs me personally, then I'm willing to pay that price.
I'm just going to play devil's advocate for 5 seconds.
Go for it.
Because I'm already hearing objections, or even objections that I've had. If I'm being honest. Which would be, we say America is, built on slavery. Well, but I read the founding documents and I go, mostly it was built on good ideas, maybe that just were applied hypocritically. Right. So as a pastor, and I'm just from your perspective as a pastor, when you hear those kinds of pushbacks on that from people in the congregation or from friends, how do we point them back to a healthy sort of Christ-based, biblically based perspective? Because I think at the root of that is defensiveness, right? Like we don't want to, so how do we respond to that well?
I think it's totally understandable to feel that way. And I don't think that makes you a person that's filled with hate or a person that's trying to ignore the issue or anything like that. I think what's tough to see sometimes and recognize is that, I said this to our congregation yesterday, I said, I feel like the argument over whether or not racism is an issue, and very often an issue, is almost silly, because none of us argues whether or not sin exists.
Sure.
So as long as sin exists, are we shocked that racism is a part of the problem? Are we seriously shocked that it's probably most of the time a part of the mistreatment or the misunderstanding or the mishandling or the abuse or the sense of neglect or the feelings?
Now, one other question I've got for you. This is just sort of next level. So we've kind of talked about, how do we respond in this moment, but just moving forward, and we talk about constructive change, because I think that's another pushback is people go, well, what do you want from me? Like, I can deal with this moment, but what do you really want from me? And one of the things that I really respect about our church, and like I said when we started off, something wasn't a reason why I came to Calvary, was just sort of like a side benefit that I didn't know I needed in my life, which is the fact that, our church is intentionally multi-ethnic. I don't even know that that's necessarily like a stated goal, but it is just sort of a reality. I mean, maybe you could speak to that. Like, there's nothing that on the website that says, hey, we are a multi-ethnic church. It's just a reality of our church. So kind of bridging that gap, looking at the future as churches try to be better about, making sure Sunday isn't the most segregated day in America. But what can we do? What can pastors do? And what have you done to make that happen here?
Well, it's
a really long question. I'm sorry.
A lot of it's been, honestly, it's a mandate that we have, Scott. It's like you said, it's not a part of like a vision statement or anything like that. It's just been a mandate that God has given us since the beginning. My dad, when we were in Elizabethton, Tennessee, there was a church that had a lot of Black families in it that had some issues, and so my dad had a relationship with that church. He'd preached there, knew their pastor, and so many of those families started coming, and this started something. Oh man, people weren't happy about it. We got threats, we got phone calls.
Well, listen, for people who are just listening and not watching, you are not 70 years old, and your dad planted this church in 1945. This
is 30 years ago.
Yeah.
In the 80s in Elizabeth, in late 80s, early 90s. And so neighbors who were disruptive, and we had plenty of run-ins with people, and it was wild. My dad got a few death threats. I mean, it was intense. And then the things that the Black people were having to deal with in our church. And so we felt this mandate to protect, to love, and to serve the Black community, because there was almost this feeling, if they can't be here, then where can they go? And so we fought to protect that. And out of that, God started to do some incredible things. It's not a patronizing thing for us. We don't, Black History February doesn't get here and we just go, hey, let's talk about, let's let a Black preacher come up and preach in February. Let's do all of this stuff that patronizes the Black community and just really, it does nothing to move us forward at all.
Yeah.
So we've been very intentional about making sure that we have Black leadership and Black voices that are very prominent in our church, that have a real role in our church, not just figureheads, but they have real authority, and the people can really see that God is using them. And so we're blessed, and God has really done something special here, and we protect it and we speak into it. And I refuse to let something happen like what happened in our country over the past week. I refuse to have a Sunday come and not talk to that pain and not talk to that struggle. Because if I look over it, then that says something to the Black community that's a part of our church, that they don't hear me. Yeah. They don't see me. And so we'll speak right into it. And I've lost, honestly, you have to be willing to lose some things to gain some things. I've lost people because of it. I'm not conservative enough. I'm not Republican enough. I don't speak out about this enough. And so I've got that tension. And my dad told me when I took the leadership of the church, he said, listen, your biggest struggle leading a church like this is going to be that there are going to be people who are going to want to pull the vision to the right and to the left. And you've got to walk this difficult road of the middle to where you can reach your hand out to both sides and say, hey, listen, I know we disagree on a lot, but we got a whole lot more in common when it comes to Jesus than we really know. Let's come together. Let's make a difference in our city. Let's put all of that down to serve Jesus, to love one another. And it's been really special to watch that.
Well, thanks so much again, Robbie. I really appreciate you coming on.
No problem.
And coming out of that interview, I walked away with a couple of things that really stuck out to me. AJ, one of those things was I really loved the analogy, and I know you may have heard this other places, and if you're listening, you may have heard this other places, but I loved that analogy with the parable of the Good Samaritan, this idea of we have an opportunity to improve somebody's life without necessarily accepting blame and saying, this is my fault. I know that is, there are people actually in culture who want you to say, this is your fault. And I know that for a lot of us, that's a bridge too far. At the same time, I think if we have a Christ-like attitude and mindset, we can say, I don't have to accept blame for something, but I can still accept responsibility for this and put this on my shoulders.
For healing, restoration, making things right.
That's right. And to be fair, maybe it is an opportunity for us to self-examine a little bit and make sure that there isn't any blame to be laid with us. Certainly no individual person is responsible for all of us of a system, but in any instances where we maybe have contributed to a system, maybe even unknowingly, that self-reflection is good. And I think it would be a godly thing to do, to pause and examine oneself and go, okay, is there any, I think of the psalmist, right? And David saying, examine my heart, our Lord, search my heart and find imperfections. Are we having that humble attitude? Also, I think our church has done a really good job of bringing diverse leadership into the fold. That the leadership on stage at our church is not all white leadership. So, for those of you who lead churches in diverse communities, maybe 60 years ago your church was in an all white community, and now you are in an ethnically diverse neighborhood, and your church is continuing to decline, and your congregation is still predominantly white, and you want to know, how can we reach our community? I think just having a hot dog dinner, AJ, is not enough. Or on, during, as Robbie was talking about, just on Black History Month, partnering up with the Black church down the street, that's tokenism to some degree. It's certainly patronizing. It's not necessarily moving the narrative forward or moving healing forward. And so being open to bringing people of color, leaders of color, onto your leadership team and giving them a platform and a voice, and recognizing their leadership skills and ability, and recognizing that you might be losing something by not having leaders of color on your team.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I heard T.D. Jakes say last week was in regards to, maybe beginning to have a diverse stage presence, maybe in your worship team. He said, I mean, sort of speaking, for a group, I don't want to be a prop on your stage. I want to be your friend. Yeah. And that kind of cut to me a bit, because I know a lot of churches with the best of intentions, and that's even really a necessary step. I mean, to begin to have your public facing side of your church to begin to have some diversity in it, but real relationships are where it's at. Right. Developing friendships, knowing people, knowing their families, knowing their hurts.
Yeah, one other note on that point of diversifying your leadership. I was speaking with a pastor of a church, and I don't even want to say where it is or what denomination, but he mentioned that in his particular denomination, even if he wanted to go and interview leaders of color, that there just aren't very many in his denomination. And so it's not so much an intentional thing, but sort of an unintentional thing. And it speaks to, and we can talk more about this after hearing from Ivan, but our circles are very small. And that the fact that we can't even think of leaders of color to interview when we have open positions says something about the circles that we build. And I don't think it's out of evil or malice or racism or any of that. It's just that can be just another one of those sort of red flags for us, and go, wait a minute, our circles are not very big.
Yeah. Open up.
Open that up. All right. So next we're going to hear from Pastor Matthew St. John, another pastor that I happen to know very well. But the reason why I wanted to, he was very briefly my pastor when I was growing up in Dallas. He's a Dallas Seminary graduate. And but the reason why I wanted to talk with Pastor Matthew is because now he's actually the senior pastor, lead pastor of New Hope Church in Minneapolis. So I thought, to get that perspective of a pastor who is leading in Minneapolis right now, given everything that's going on, it could be really valuable to hear from him. And he is another pastor who's been on this journey now for years and years and years, and really taken a beating from his own church as they've been trying to shift the culture in their church. And he will speak a little bit about that and the challenges that he's experienced. But he's just a very soft-spoken, godly, humble leader that I've had the privilege of seeing both up close and far away for many years. And can't wait for you to hear this conversation that I had with Pastor Matthew St. John.
Well, talking with Pastor Matthew St. John, and Pastor Matthew, you're at New Hope Church, is that right? Did I get that right?
That's right. Yep. New
And
Hope
you're
Church.
in Minneapolis.
Yes. Yeah.
And so before we get too far into things, I just want to start with sort of the base question that we're wanting to ask pastors, which is, how would you encourage other pastors to lead through this historic moment that we are experiencing together?
Yeah. Oh, Scott, thank you so much for asking, and it's great to be with you. I think when you reached out a day or so ago about this with that question, I've been chewing on it quite a bit. And there's a couple of things that come readily to my mind when I think about how we pastors can lead in this historic moment. One is, if we are white pastors, we need to give deference to those friends of ours of color who are pastoral leaders. Now, by deference, I don't mean to say that we need to mute ourselves and not be involved. I'm simply saying that we need to be really good listeners and learners. We need to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And right now, we need to underscore the weep with those who weep factor, and put ourselves in a position where we are available, we are serving, our hands are open, but that we are stepping to second place so that those who are among our friends of color rightfully are in first place and can give leading voice to how we must think and feel about the pain that is within the African American community and in communities of color and so forth. I think that's one key piece there. I can elaborate on that more fully if needed, but I think a second key piece is that we need to put action to our own words that we do offer. So, for example, this past Sunday at New Hope Church, we took some time and we gave meaningful space to genuine lament regarding what's going on with George Floyd's death, with the chaos that's been in Minneapolis and elsewhere. And bigger than that, just the narrative as it unfolds far beyond just this past week or so. We gave meaningful space for lament. And a friend of mine in our church reached out to me afterwards, and she's in an ethnically mixed family. She is a white woman married to a person of color, a man of color. And she said that she was initially not interested in joining us for church Sunday. Now, like a lot of churches, of course, we've been doing a video broadcast exclusively right now. And she said she wasn't interested in tuning in because in her mind, she was concerned that it would be one more church that just kind of patted everybody's head and talked about hope and basically just mealy-mouthed their way through an awkward statement or two about race and about pain. And what she was instead, she did join, and she was blown away that there was not only meaningful lament, there was not only a declaration of the realities of white supremacy and the need for the blood of Christ to wash over all of these things, but there was also meaningful action points that were given for how we might work together going forward as not just our church, but as a church that's part of the bigger church in our community.
Yeah.
So I think that action that goes beyond just the head pats and the well-meaning perhaps, but nonetheless sometimes empty rhetoric is something that we pastors have to give attention to, because our friends of color are tired of the words. They appreciate it, but they're tired of it. They're tired of inaction, particularly within the white church. They're tired of the what can feel often as patronizing. They want something done, and so I think it would be incumbent upon guys that look like me to ensure that, to the extent that we can, we are doing something and not just saying something and patting people on the head.
That's a really good thought. And I think one of the pushbacks that I think that would be natural to that would be, as a pastor who's trying to not be political one way or the other, liberal, too liberal or too conservative,
right,
what kind of action is appropriate, so that we aren't just being political, which none of us really want to be, I don't think. Well, maybe some do, but for the most part, we don't want to be political.
Some do. And I prefer not. One thing I've discovered, in these past years, as our church has been on a journey to become a large multicultural and multi-ethnic expression of God's heart, I've been called every name in the book: socialist, Marxist, have no integrity, don't care about the gospel. I mean, it's been brutal. And so try as you might to avoid the politics, and we actually work hard to transcend that and rise above it and not get pulled into it, but you get labels attached to you regardless. And now that said, the action points, it's interesting. There are some I might call nonpartisan or non-political type actions. So for example, I'm part of a small group of pastors, predominantly African-American, which is, to my point earlier about letting African-American leaders or leaders of color have the kind of the front row, if you will, or the front spot. I'm part of a small group that is collecting money. This is in partnership with the National Christian Foundation, receiving money that is then being divvied up among African-American churches, primarily in the Twin Cities, that first were devastated by COVID-19 economically. And now, of course, with the protests and some of the, much of the damage that's been done there, now they're reeling because of the just the economic toll that the riots have taken. So a very practical thing is to find meaningful ways to provide meaningful resources for churches, particularly among our friends of color that are financially struggling. That's one. It's a simple thing. I think when it comes to the political thing, it's always interesting to me. The white evangelical church is great about getting organized regarding, say, the issue of abortion and talking up. I mean, every evangelical church in America, I'm sure here in this next few months, are going to have voter guides and all this kind of stuff where we say, okay, these are the candidates that are pro-life and so forth. I mean, this is soup and nuts for most white evangelicals. So it's always interesting to me, though, that's fair game and that's acceptable and appropriate. But when one starts to talk about thinking about how one votes relative to the betterment of the communities of color, somehow that's not fair game. Somehow that's political, or we need to avoid that. Right. So we kind of pick and choose our politics, and I think it would be incumbent upon us in white spaces to step back and have more integrity around that.
How do we start to bridge that gap where we're not afraid to say the right thing, which is Black Lives Matter, which is true, without feeling like, well, I'm also then pledging allegiance to 1,500 other things, maybe that I'm not there yet, or I'm not going to be there ever. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, it absolutely makes sense. So there have been a handful of times from our platform at New Hope Church where I have said to our congregation, folks, Black Lives Matter.
Mm.
And this isn't a statement about the entity, the organization Black Lives Matter, but this is a statement that we must affirm, particularly those of us in white spaces. Black Lives Matter. We need to have the courage to just say it. And to recognize that just because I say something like that does not have to mean that it is a full endorsement of everything that organization buys into. And if I have to qualify it, then qualify it. But don't shy away from reaching toward the bigger picture, because our friends of color, they know they matter. They don't know that we think they matter. We've had people leave the church over this. I'm telling you, people really struggle with the idea that there is a better kingdom to which we must have our allegiance.
Yeah.
But it is that mindset that helps us to rise above or transcend the structures and systems that can trip us up.
I was reading this morning in Mark chapter 3 about Jesus healing the man with the withered hand, and the conflict that Jesus has with the synagogue rulers. With the Pharisees rather, because he's healing him on a Sabbath, right? But there's this question that Jesus asks: is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill? And they don't answer the question. And the reason they don't answer the question, the Pharisees don't, is because they can't. They can't without giving something up. And I feel like that's true for us a little bit, as those of us who, and again, I'm not speaking for any of our listeners or for any other person other than myself, but as a generally conservative person, white man in the United States, oftentimes I might choose to withhold doing something good, saying something like Black Lives Matter, because I'm afraid it might give something up, some way of life, some framework, some rigid sort of view that I have on the world, and I'm afraid that might give something up. I'm having confession here with you, Pastor Matthew, but it was a stark reminder that Jesus says there's never a wrong time to do the right thing, is what Jesus is trying to tell them, and I don't want to be caught like the Pharisees going, wait a minute, this is outside the boundaries of what I can conceive. And to your point, it's the kingdom way, right? To do the right thing no matter the time.
We spend an inordinate amount of time with a closed fist trying to protect and preserve and hang on to stuff. And the idea of opening that fist so that it's an open hand and releasing is very difficult for us. And then when you take that and you apply that to, giving voice to grave injustice, you apply that to putting leaning in with an open ear to the pains of a community that has been suffering for 400 years on this continent. When you can decide that the privileges and rules that we enjoy aren't in fact really shared, that has a lot of power. And I think it really reflects the heart of God for all peoples in a way that is very counterintuitive to how somebody that looks like me has been conditioned to think.
I'm so thankful for you and for the time you spent and for sharing your wisdom and your experience.
Thank you, Scott. Well, it's a privilege to be with you. And these conversations really matter. I think it rejoices our Savior, and it rejoices our community that we're willing to step into these conversations and explore and process and move toward meaningful action as it relates to letting the gospel have its effect here on these things. This is hard, it's painful, it's costly. We've kind of alluded to that already in a couple different ways. But the worst thing than that is that we don't have the conversations at all. And I think this really matters. What you're doing matters. It's good to it's good that we can step toward these things, especially at this time.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much for the time.
you
Thanks
bet.
for spending some time with me.
That was a really good conversation again, Scott. And I do want to touch on, the whole Black Lives Matter thing. I've found this to be a point of frustration in the last week as I've been witness to social media posts.
Yeah.
And
Maybe
it's
just be best to turn off social media.
the inflammatory nature in which those three words get reactions from some people. And I love what Pastor Matthew said, or how he kind of framed it. That's exactly what I've been thinking as well. And this even happened to you on social media as well. You can make a 3-word statement: Black Lives Matter, capital B, lowercase l, lowercase m, and a period at the end. Just a declaratory statement that all Christians should affirm and all humans should affirm. And it turns into, in some respects, it's been hijacked by a movement that has done things that a lot of people would disagree with, maybe in tactics and methodology and things like that. Taking things
they've got all kinds of things on their website that I wouldn't agree with.
Yeah. So, but I am frustrated that we can't have a simple 3-word sentence, a statement of fact, and just let people go, yeah, I agree with you.
One way to look at it is, if we say those 3 words, then we are giving credence to the organization. Another way to look at it is, if we refuse to say those words, then we're ceding that ground in those words to that organization. And I think it's incumbent on us to stand on the side of the human issue of it, right? The created an image of God issue of this. And if you don't like the organization, it's more important than ever for you to affirm that statement that Black Lives Matter,
right?
Because the fewer of us who say it, the more it gets controlled by an ideology that you might not ascribe to. So there's just 2 different ways to look at that, and I would encourage you to look at it from the side of, we can redeem this statement because it is a true, it is a factually true, biblically true, God honoring thing to acknowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
the other thing that you also see frequently, if those 3 words are uttered as a statement of fact, is then the bounce back of Blue Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, All Lives Matter.
All Lives Matter.
And I mean, it would be an infinitely long list of things that matter to people if we had to have that retort every time it's stated. And that's so frustrating to me, that we don't do that in almost any other area of life. People can just say something that they care about, and nobody challenges them on all the things that they didn't just say that they also care about. And I don't know why this needs to be singled out. And I think that's a point that I think, a lot of people of color would like to make. I think that's a bigger point that they would like us to maybe be able to get a hold of. What's the need to defend every other possible race or ethnicity that you could say that matters also?
I appreciated what Pastor Matthew said in terms of, if you have to qualify it, but that shouldn't stop us from saying the right thing. And I think he made a fair point about the fact that, we are pretty picky, choosy about the politics that we promote and don't promote.
Yeah.
And, what would it look like? What would it look like? Not telling people who to vote for, but if we started to care about some of these human issues and not seeing it so much as in a red and blue dichotomy, but really just from a human lens. And those are challenging words. I'm still wrestling with those things. I'm not settled on it, but I hope that, you as a pastor or church leader listening to this, that we hope it makes you a little bit uncomfortable, because we're trying to challenge our assumptions and our thinking in this. And again, so far we've heard from 2 white pastors, one serving in Minneapolis, kind of in the middle of everything, one serving in East Tennessee, which might be a community more like the one that you live in. More communities are like East Tennessee than there are communities like Minneapolis. But they're both leaders who have been on the forefront of this discussion for a long time in their respective communities, and made a lot of progress and inroads. And but now we want to sort of pivot, AJ, to a voice that we hope that you will listen to carefully. So you want to introduce Ivan?
Yeah, Ivan is such a great guy, and we at TMG worked with his church. It's been 4 years ago now, somewhere around there, 4 or 5 years ago, out in Santa Ana, California. So he's in the part of the Los Angeles sprawl out there in Orange County, and I'm pretty sure Orange County. So his church is Second Baptist Church, which in and of itself, probably a lot of people would go, Second Baptist, what does that even mean? And the history of his church, which is the oldest African-American church in the county out there. Second Baptist was formed out of First Baptist, 100 or so years ago. First Baptist was the white church, and due to segregation at the time, African Americans were basically not allowed to worship there. But I'm saying this sarcastically, out of the kindness of their hearts, they allowed them to be Second Baptist Church. So, there they are out there with even the name of their church is a reminder of the past and where they've come. And so that's a brief history of Second Baptist Church. Ivan Pitts has been pastor there now for many years, and just welcomed us in, and we had a great time working with him. So anyway, he's one of the people that I reached out to, and let's have a listen to this conversation with Dr. Ivan Pitts. I'm having a conversation today with my friend. This is the Reverend Dr. Ivan Pitts. He's a senior pastor at Second Baptist Church in Santa Ana, California. And we worked together. It's been several years ago now. I don't know, my memory isn't going to serve probably at the exact, maybe 2014. Is that right?
Yeah, somewhere 15,
Somewhere around.
I think 16. Yeah, I think it was 15 through the beginning of 16.
Okay. And so he's just one of the people that we've reached out to have this conversation, to have a conversation between brothers, and to try to understand each other better, with an emphasis on me understanding him and what he has to say about this just present situation going on in the country. Not a new situation, but in a new expression of it, unfortunately. And so that's where we start today. So Ivan, thank you so much for agreeing to talk. And my prayer is that this will be a benefit to everybody that has the pleasure of hearing it.
Thank you. I'm honored for an opportunity to share with you, and I do count you as a friend.
Thank you, brother. So to start our conversation off today, our primary question that we've started with each person that we're speaking with is, how would you encourage pastors to lead their churches, their congregations through this particular point in history, which I think is a turning point. I pray it's a turning point. And I know this has left a lot of pastors and leaders, grappling with what's the right message, where do we need to go from here? What's the right thing to talk about so that we can affect change? So Ivan, what encouragement or instruction or whatever you might want to call it would you have today for pastors? And I guess I should probably say in particularly white pastors, because this is where change needs to start. And so, my friend, I'll let you say what you feel like you want to say.
Yeah, I think that we have to encourage our pastors to lead with honesty and with courage. I think it takes a lot of honesty. Honesty as it relates to the fact that there is racism in this world. Two, that people have been victimized by racism for more than 400 years, and it is not a thing of the past. Three, recognize that we are our white brothers and sisters, whether it is intentional or unintentional, we are complicit when we are quiet, when we are silent. And if we're not working for racial equality and justice for all, then we're working against it. So that's the honest piece. Yeah. And then you have to, once you have accepted the fact and admitted the fact that there is racism and that you are complicit, that's painful. But we have to be courageous enough to deal with the pain of the reality of our situation. And I do want you to recognize that I know that it is difficult. To some degree, you may interpret, I just called every white person a racist, right? And that's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that every white person operates and moves in a position of privilege that most Blacks will never, have never, hopefully will, but have never been able to walk in that freedom. And if you don't fight for the freedom of others, you jeopardize your own freedom.
Mm-hmm. So I've heard, so there's a couple of terms this week. I feel like I have had a transformational week. Monday, I woke up very discouraged, and I don't even know how many adjectives I could use for it. And here we're recording this now on Thursday, June the 4th. And I've had some transformation in my thinking because I've been listening and I've gained, I hope, some understanding. A couple of the terms that are used are systematic racism and white privilege. And this week was not the first time I've heard those terms. I've heard those terms before, but I never really got an explanation for what those meant that allowed me to put myself into the situation, understand how I might be a part of that, understand that it's actually true, that it's real, that it exists. And because there's been a lot of discussion happening this week for the benefit of all of us, there's been a lot of people talking about it. And it's been a refreshing week also on one hand, because I've heard a lot of really calm voices and encouraging voices that have wanted the end result to be understanding. And I felt that from you as well. You did a video on Facebook on Monday or Tuesday. So can you talk to me a little bit about systematic racism and about white privilege? Because I don't want to think, all right, I got a handle on this and I'm okay, moving forward. I want to hear a lot of people talk to me about what this means to them, to make sure that I am able to really grasp it well, and for those that may be watching.
Yes. Thank you. I think that first and foremost, we have to listen. We have to listen to the stories of the people who have been victimized by systemic racism. Mm-hmm. And listen over and over again until you begin to understand what it looks like, what it tastes like, what it smells like, so you can spot it instantly and immediately. And let me give you just a few examples of systemic racism. When we talk about systemic racism, it means that it is a system that is biased towards a particular race. And it is oftentimes larger and stronger than any individual. It is almost impossible for one individual to fight a system that is rigged in a racist way. So we know that our criminal justice system is indication and an example, not an indication, is an example of systemic racism. There are laws that are on the books that around drugs, for example, crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. And we know that crack cocaine is prevalent in certain communities and powder cocaine is prevalent in other communities, but yet the penalty for those are not equal. Misdemeanor versus felony. That is a systemic problem. We know the system is rigged against those who use and sell and distribute crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. The other systems, and there's several, I'll just give you two of the big ones. The criminal justice system, we know that men and women of color are more likely to get the death penalty for the same kinds of crimes than their white counterparts. That's a system, right? And we also know that lower economic communities, socioeconomic communities, when it comes to education, they get fewer resources. Let me give you an example. There were schools in affluent communities within the same school district that got their computers and got their curriculum for homeschooling, if you will, during the pandemic. And there were other schools that were 5-6 weeks in the pandemic before they even got curriculum, before they even got Chromebooks. Some didn't even have internet access. And you think about that, we're not talking about different cities or different school districts. We're talking about schools within the same school system. Certain parts of the system get more resources, they get better teachers. And we know that there is a connection between education, attainment, and criminology. And so those are the systems that that are rigged against Black and brown people and people of a different socioeconomic status. So it's there, right? It's there. Those are systems. Even how our police officers are trained and what they paint a picture of what a criminal looks like. Oftentimes, it paints a picture of Black and brown people, and it begins to have a mental system that criminalizes color. And those are realities. Now, what I want to say to those, I know that this language for some people is hard. It's hard to hear someone who is African American, someone who's Black, a man of color, talk about racism, racist, and it stirs up emotions. I'm not trying to stir up emotions. I'm trying to stir up action and strategy and thinking. I'm trying to empower you to say, gosh, I never realized that my Black and brown brothers and sisters are going through this on a day-by-day basis, and that I need you to feel like none of us are safe until all of us are safe.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I love that. And you're now starting to talk about action, which I feel like in previous times, I never could understand what the action item was. It's been said before that these things exist, and I never could figure out what the action item is. Like, what am I supposed to do? And it leaves a feeling of helplessness. I think for those that desire to do something but don't understand what, it leaves a helplessness, and then it leads to forgetting, really. And so what are some practical action steps that people can begin to make changes in their own lives or whatever needs to be done?
Yeah. So I think there are several practical things that we can do, and I appreciate the question. So I think the first step is the hardest step, and it's an admission that I might be part of the problem, and a deep desire to search inward, your own hearts. And I know that the inward journey is the most difficult journey, but the inward journey is the most powerful, transformative journey that anyone can go on. And so what is that? A self-examined life is a life not, an unexamined life is a life not worth living. And so we must first examine our own hearts. And let me give you an example, just so that, I'm not saying, only you people have to examine your life. A part of my my doctoral dissertation project, I was looking at the intersection between a traditional Black church doing community outreach ministry in a community that's changed. And in that particular context, it was primarily Latin American people in that community. And there was a history of some tension between Blacks and Latinos. And I wanted to, talk about, we have to work together and, things of that nature. And I'm this very open-minded, progressive voice for community involvement and collaboration and unity and so forth and so on. And in that journey, I had to spend time with some of my Hispanic and Latino and Latina brothers and sisters. And in that process, I thought I was open-minded. In that process, I thought I was an agent for collaboration and racial unity. And I discovered to my to a very deep pain that I had some biases that I didn't know I had. And it was so embarrassing. It was embarrassing for me to realize that I had this in me. And I instantly wanted to blame the media for giving these images. I wanted to blame, no, I can't blame anybody. I am responsible for my own biases. I am responsible for my own hatred, if you will. I am responsible for where I am. And my white brothers and sisters, you are responsible for how you treat others, what you think about others, and you are responsible to emulate the mind of Christ, regardless of the color of the skin, the political leanings of the individual, or the criminal background of a person. So I think the first step is an admission, as I had to do, admit that I might be part of the problem, and maybe even admit that I am part of the problem. The second piece is to come close to the situation, meaning when you're far away, things look small, right? You're a mile and a half away from a building on a highway. It seems small, but the closer you get to it, the more details you see, and the larger it becomes. And I'm saying that sometimes you can't empathize, you can't connect because you're too far away. And I want you to get close. I want you to listen to your friends, your African American and Latino friends, but in particular, your African American friends. And if you don't have any, that's probably part of the problem, right? And if you only got two, I got two good friends, and that's probably part of the problem. But how do you begin to spend time in the community that you don't understand? Because the greatest detriment to racial equality and unity and racism is ignorance. And oftentimes we're ignorant because we are far away.
Yeah.
And then the third step, and I think that this is very, very important. So one is an admission. Two is a coming close, being intimate in the communities that you're concerned about. We don't understand something. We demonize something that we don't fully understand. And then thirdly, begin to come up with a plan, thinking about the long game, a plan that begins to lead to racial equality that you champion. Don't come up with a plan for others, a plan that you champion, a plan that is long-term, because what my concern is that we have this news cycle, and when the news cycle is over, so is the planning. No. Love is patient and love is kind. If you love us, be patient enough. If you love your brown and black brothers and sisters, be patient enough to work this plan for the long haul and make it a part of the very fabric of your ministries. Make it as important as issues of right to life, pro-life, and pro-choice. Make it a part of the ministry that is as important as missions and church planting. Make it a part at the forefront. Put it on your budget and make it a big part of your budget, because at the end of the day, how we treat each other and how we work for each other is what's going to be pleasing to God. I want to push a little further, and I'll say a couple things. One is when I was in seminary in Atlanta, Georgia, I had a roommate. His name was Jacob. He was from Cameroon. And whenever I would see Jacob, I would always say, I'm this kid from California. I got on shorts and t-shirt, and he's always in his African garb, always looked very stately. I've never seen him with his head down. He always walked with his head up and his shoulders back. and I'm walking, I'm like, hey, what's up, Jacob, man? How you doing? And he would always say this, I'm okay if you're okay. And I was like, all right. And I would just kind of go on my way. After a couple semesters of just kind of, flippantly, hey, man, how you doing? Not really listening to his response. One day he says, I'm okay if you're okay. And I said, man, what does that mean? Why do you say that? When I say what's up, you're supposed to say, you're in America, you're supposed to say, what's up, man? And we're supposed to keep going. He goes, no, Ivan. He's very stately. He says, in my culture, I can't be okay if you're not okay.
Wow.
We have to adopt that as Christian brothers.
Hmm.
You can't be okay if I'm not okay.
Yeah.
If I'm not okay when I go into a retail store and I'm being followed by security, then you can't be okay when you go in that same store and you're not followed by security.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not okay when I'm pulled over by a police officer and I've done nothing wrong and I am scared for my life, and you pull over by a police officer and you can say, hey man, what's up? How you doing? No, if I'm not okay, you can't be okay.
Brother, I want you to be okay. So, I'm going to do my part, and I hope everybody watching will do theirs as well. There's a sphere of overlap between all of our spheres of influence have some overlap. We're a big country with a lot of people. And if everybody took it to heart, then it would change fast. But we need everybody. We need everybody on board. And I think this is possible. My prayer is that the name George Floyd will be, in one respect, a bookend on the end of something, and also on the beginning of something new, and not just a name in a long list, and something that happened along the way.
Yeah.
I really do. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, my brother, my friend. I want to know that you're okay.
Thank you.
And let me pray for you, man.
Okay.
God, thank you for this conversation between brothers. And God, I thank you for in your way, God, you work everything for good. And God, I pray that we're in the midst of that right now, that though there's been pain, and there will continue to be until we see Lord Jesus again, God, that this will be something that you are working for good, and that we will see this as a turning point in the history of our nation, and in the history of your church. And so God, I just pray that you will be lifting up leaders and workers and everybody that it will take to affect this change in the way that God, we know you originally laid out for us. I just pray that this sin of racism will be blotted out, and that we'll find the unity, God, that you created man to be with one another, and then as a display of the unity that we have with you, so that those who know us would know you. And so God, let this be a turning point, and specifically for my brother, I pray protection and peace over him and his family through this time and into the future. And God, that you'll continue to bless him in his ministry, and that the name of Jesus will continue to be known in Santa Ana and to the ends of the earth. And we lift this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Man, I just got to say, AJ, having listened to that interview, I think one of the things that I appreciate the most about Pastor Ivan is he's the most direct of the three interviews we heard today. Not that I don't want to, nothing against
he kind of gets
Pastor
to
Robbie
be the most direct too,
yeah, right. Yeah, we always, I don't know, I feel this too, always sort of couching language, like maybe we oughta, maybe this. And he's like, all right, you want action? I'll give you action.
Yeah.
And for those of you that watched it, like that 20 minutes, AJ and Pastor Ivan talked for almost an hour. And so I do hope to be able to release that whole interview. but the 20 minutes or so that you just listened to is completely unedited. So as I didn't have to edit it at all. AJ would ask a question and he was right there with an answer. So where I might have to splice some things together if it's me talking, so that I sound like a coherent person, not Pastor Ivan. I mean, he just had it on the top. So let's just briefly recap, I think, those action items, AJ.
Yeah.
That'll be a great way to wrap up this episode. I know that this episode is long, but this is too important of a conversation. And so let's just hit those. I think for the whole episode, these are the action items that we should apply, because they really tap into, I think, the heart of what Pastor Robbie and what Pastor Matthew were saying as well. So let's end with those. So
So number one, Ivan said, let's admit that there's a problem. Let's admit that racism exists.
That's a tough one for us, though, isn't it?
It is. It's a lot harder for some people than it is others. I mean, again, we've all been on social media, and everybody's observing everybody else. And, I'm just sitting there taking in, which of my friends have been very resistant and which of my friends have been very open. And I'm sure, everybody's kind of doing the same thing, whereas everybody's sort of lining up on this. Mm-hmm. I'm not discouraged by, this group that I'm seeing that is pushing back. I'm still hopeful, because I think with more conversations like this, they'll probably begin to see where they can open up. But admitting that there's a thing, this happened for me. I not that I was like, I'm a racist and I like being a racist. I just never thought of, I just never thought of it.
Yeah.
And which would be if you Google a list of white privilege, there you go. That's on the list. It just never occurred to me.
Yeah.
And so, I guess I could say that I've admitted this week that this is a thing. This is not made up. It's not perceived. It's real. And if we care about our brothers and sisters, no matter what color they are, we will want to know whether this is something they're experiencing, get to understand what that's like, and figure out where, in whatever our sphere of influence is, what we can do to help.
Well, Robbie talked about this, about that natural reflex to be defensive. To say, I'm not racist. I didn't, I don't own slaves. I didn't, I'm not doing racist things. And that reaction is natural. And I appreciated that Robbie was like, I don't blame anybody for feeling that way. That is a natural response. At the same time, we can still choose a different response, even if that's our natural one. Because that's my natural reaction, is like, wait a minute. My other natural reaction is, I did not grow up in a wealthy family. I grew up in a middle-class family, but I didn't grow up in a wealthy family. I didn't go, I paid for a lot of my college. I had some scholarships, but I paid a lot of money to go to college. My life, I didn't feel, at least to me, like it was handed to me on a silver platter. A lot of the things that I have in life, I feel like I've earned and worked hard for. And so, but one of the things that Pastor Robbie said, not in this interview, but in a sermon recently, that just really hit me, was actually one of the first things I heard that just smacked me in the face, which is that for all of the things that I have fought to overcome in my life, and there have been a lot, the color of my skin has never been one of those things.
Yeah.
It's just never been one of those things that's never been a factor in any challenge that I have faced.
Yeah.
And recognizing that, for at least, even if you don't think it's universally true, but I think it is largely universally true, there are some people in your church or in your community who the color of their skin has, at least at one point, if it happened even one time in their whole life, that is one more time than it has ever happened to you as a white person. Mm-hmm. And that makes it real.
Yeah.
And that hit me. I was like, that is so true. That has never been a factor for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ivan's second point, Scott, was to come close. And what he meant by that, as you heard, is just to develop some actual relationships with people. And, that, of course, that's easier said than done as well. We've had that conversation around our house. You can't just snap your fingers and have new friends. So, but at least come close to the situation. Come close to, if you do already know people, just ask questions, have a conversation, find out about people. Mm-hmm. And then just look for whatever opportunity you can to come closer to this this situation, this issue, but definitely to people. Come close to people, because that's when we begin to see the humanity in it and the evil in it and the necessity of change. So I think that is a fantastic action point.
I think this is one of the areas where social media can actually serve us, because you might not have very many close, if you're a white pastor listening to this, I don't want to assume that every pastor who's listening to this is not a person of color. There may be, hopefully some of our friends of color are listening, but if you're a white leader, you likely have leaders of color that you respect, even if you don't know them very well or don't know them personally, on Facebook. And I have found, as I've been asking questions and listening, that these people that I'm fringe connected to on Facebook are really responsive to questions and are open to dialogue, and especially ones who are pastors and leaders. I mean, they want to help the situation. So if you come humbly, don't come with all your baggage and all your junk and being like, well, what about this? What about this? But if you come with a sincere question, like, help me understand this.
Mm-hmm.
I've found my friends of color, who I don't know really all that well personally, but just am connected to on Facebook, to be really helpful. And for me, I've brought up my objections, but I've tried to do it in a way where I say, I don't really understand this issue. I'm open to the fact that I might be missing something. So can you help me understand this? And they will respond to that. But if you come at it from, hey, you're wrong, here's all the reasons why, they probably won't respond to that. So if you're looking for how can I get closer to the situation, start on Facebook with your friends, or if you're in a pastor's group or a Baptist association that has other leaders of color as a part of the association, but you usually don't hang out with that crowd from the Baptist association. Like, here's your chance. Find people that you are at least fringe connected to, even if it's just a Facebook friendship, and start conversations. And as Pastor Matthew talked about, start from the second seat, saying, I could be missing something. Help me understand this.
Yeah.
And generally, I think you'll get a positive response.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome. So number one, admit there's a problem, admit there's an issue, that racism exists. Number two, come close in relationships to understand and really get a feel for what life is like for somebody that's different than you. And number three, Ivan said, plan for what you can do. And I love this. I love that he went there, and I didn't know he had 3 action points when we started the conversation. But I love this because this is still the Church Revitalization podcast, and we're speaking to you. Likely you are a pastor listening to this, or a leader in your church. And we want to talk about practical things. We want to talk about what we can do to make our churches healthy and productive and kingdom-minded. And we are all about strategy at TMG. So the fact that he said, plan for what you can do, hits right at home. And I think this is something, and I know, Scott, actually, you and I haven't talked about this, but we probably both feel the same way. Going forward with churches that we work with, this is going to be a conversation that gets had with churches that are going through a revitalization process. You can't, because a bulk of our time, a large bulk of our time, is spent talking about vision and what we're going to do moving forward, and how is our church going to interact with the world around us. And this is one of those things that you could plot down anywhere in the United States, and it'll line up with several other things. Most towns have some issue with homelessness, with poverty, with food shortage, with clothing shortage, all these things that churches typically engage with, maybe a pro-life thing, or an abortion thing that they go after. These things are universal, almost any part of the country. So is racism. And so if this isn't part of the conversation for your church now, when you're talking about how will our church respond to the world around us, then it needs to become that. This is something that your leadership needs to get together and talk about. What are we going to do as a church to combat this issue, this national issue that has an expression in our city as well? And I even mentioned budget. I mean, this is when you're building out your missions budget, you've got to have this conversation now and say, what opportunities do we have? And is there a dollar sign attached to it? And if so, how much? What are we going to accomplish with this? And all these strategic questions that we would coach your church to ask and to come up with answers for. But planning for what you can do is something that your church can and must do going forward to tackle this so that we can bring this to a swift conclusion.
I think some practical examples of this, we're not suggesting that you need to organize a march or anything like that, or get more active.
Or maybe you do.
Political perspective. Maybe you do. But partnerships, Pastor Matthew was talking about, he's a part of a pastor's group. They're identifying needs in primarily Black neighborhoods and communities. They're under-resourced. You might be in some ways over-resourced. So how can you connect, resources? I've even been discouraged by the fact we get contacted by a lot, just pull back the curtain a little bit, by a lot of churches that are historically Black churches. And even though we've done a lot of work to reduce our fees and get them as low as possible, many times they don't have the resources to work with us, and they need strategic planning help too. So I wish that we could forge more partnerships with churches that would sponsor that kind of work, so that they can have healthy, thriving churches. Strategic planning should not just be for white churches.
Mm-hmm.
Also, don't wring your hands and go, "Gosh, I wish we could do a better job of reaching our community and make our church look like our neighborhood," if we're afraid to walk around our neighborhood, just to be blunt. And so it's going to take courage and courageous leadership to make the insides of our churches look like the outside of heaven, and what inside the gates of heaven is going to look like, and what we're standing around the throne of Jesus. It's going to take intentional work. And so just to wrap this up, again, it's been a very long episode, and I appreciate you hunkering down and listening and watching. But our goal here is to reflect the kingdom of God. That is, we're not making a political statement. We are making a kingdom statement, that we stand fully behind that cause of making churches look more like the kingdom.
This has been episode 42 of the Church Revitalization podcast, and you can see today's show notes at malfersgroup.com/42, where we will also have links to watch the full interviews with the three pastors that you saw on today's episode. Thanks for joining us. Scott and I will be back with you next week with more content to help your church be healthy and make disciples.